Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Wednesday, March 27th. Let's see. I think at this point I don't really need or feel the need to check to see if the stream is going well or not. There are some extra dangers, certainly. Right now I have my Steam Deck set up to back up daily and I could definitely see it just still being in the middle of running a backup through my network and causing some download issues there. I could also see my Steam Deck just doing something completely else that would take up bandwidth. That is, I guess, true for any device on my network, but it's not like I have a ton of computers that are up and working correctly at the moment, other than my main computer. I do have servers that should be working, but I don't think they are, and I haven't dealt with any of that. And frankly, at this point, it is so not a priority. I don't know if it would ever happen. Duels Cup ranking announcements and maintenance, and that's pretty much it seems. Today we are right at the end of the month, so I have had Yu-Gi-Oh! Open, and that's about the only thing I've been doing on my computer is having Yu-Gi-Oh! Just stay open and doing a duel live every now and then. I'm so entrenched on setting up my Steam Deck right now that it's taking 100% of my time and throwing off my sleep schedule, which is exactly the opposite of what it needed to do. There is a issue specifically with the Steam Deck that I'm running into. Well, a couple of issues, and this is just again another example, I think, of your average YouTuber who's just all about positivity and bought a Steam Deck and got it delivered and then made a video about it like a day later without really having done any long-term experiment. And even the ones that come back 6 months later seem to have not really touched on issues that would have been informative to me to know before the fact. Like, one issue in particular is the buttons are fairly stiff and sticky at the beginning. And this seems to be a pretty common case for all Steam Decks, is that it isn't just a lot of loosey-goosey buttons at the first launch. It does seem like, and a lot of controllers are like that, you kind of have to wear them in. The problem is, since I'm mostly using my Steam Deck right now in desktop mode, every time I'm pressing X, I'm running the risk of the X button getting stuck, which means it's going to inherently hold down the X button on the Steam keyboard, which is the backspace key button. So you go to launch the keyboard to type in something, there's a decent chance that the button will get stuck, and it will delete what you went instead of what you were trying to add to, instead of allowing you to type and change things. You need basically a milkshake straw, is my recommendation. Stick it around the edges and press down the edges of the button. Go up and down on it a few times, and that pretty quickly wore off what I assume is just a inconsistent coating of on the edges of the Steam Deck. But yeah, it does certainly seem to me that there's a decent chance here for them to improve if they just made the holes a little bit bigger, like a fraction of a micron, maybe bigger all the way around, just to have the buttons be a little bit looser on either the plastic shell part. I don't want the buttons inherently to be smaller. The buttons on the Steam Deck are already a little squeezed. I'm not playing enough games on it to really feel like it feels wrong in any way, but there is definitely, it would be weird if they started to get button sizes that were down to what like the Joy-Con button sizes are, which are too small in my opinion. And generally speaking, everything on the Joy-Con is just too small. So this Duels Cup ended, and I didn't get any other rewards. I already collected everything, so we'll just play ranked today. There's still questions, I guess, somewhat on the layout and the touchpads. As I get into actual games, I have played a couple of games, and I'm just going through them to see what games kind of work and what games don't work. And I can say like 7 Billion Humans is more of a mouse and keyboard game, and it seems like that works particularly well. Now weirdly, in the Steam controller setups, and there's 2 controller setups in desktop mode, in particular, there is the KDE Arch Linux, KDE Plasma desktop environment setup for the controller, which is lackluster in that it thinks, because the controller is reporting itself as an Xbox 360 controller, which is what a lot of controllers do, it thinks it only has a certain number of buttons, and it is ignoring some other buttons, some of the later buttons, in particular the 3 dots in the lower right and the Steam button in the lower left, which would be technically R3 and L3. It's just not expecting that many buttons, and so it's not receiving any signals there, which means when you're in game mode, you can hold down the 3 buttons and hit up and down on the left analog stick to adjust the brightness. So you would think it should be 1-for-1 parity, that in the desktop mode you could hold down the 3 dot button, or at least you could configure a shortcut to hold down the 3 dot button and go up and down on the left analog stick, or at least have the 3 dot buttons do something, and it's just not the case. Like the KDE Plasma version, the Steam button, the 3 dot button, does nothing. Maybe in Steam's own client app it might do something. I'm not sure it even does anything there. In game on desktop mode, I'm not sure it does anything there either. So yeah, clearly this version of Linux, SteamOS 3.0, as it stands, is in need of a rather large amount of improvement, in my opinion. And so the hope here is that you don't have something that's a really slow process where the operating system doesn't get tweaked and updated, or just as ignored as it already is being ignored. And instead you're going to see frequent updates on at least once per 6 months time. Since SteamOS is pretty much just closed source and Valve, they jumped from like SteamOS 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0 and really didn't spend any time having any 0.1s, 0.2s, 0.3s. They need to embrace the idea of having subversions, in my opinion, and make some rather big improvements. There are also complaints, I think, that are very much not on Valve and SteamOS's plate. There's just kind of a lack of development and support for KDE Plasma compared to, say, something like Debian or Ubuntu, going with that extra security, having everything locked down, really leaves them to just use Flatpaks. And if they are just going to use Flatpaks, there's just not enough applications that have been converted into Flatpaks. And almost certainly it's a case where there's a lot of people who made a Linux program years, decades ago, and have disappeared, died, whatever, or just don't want to spend the energy making a Flatpak and supporting a Flatpak, which is also somewhat reasonable. That you just wouldn't inherently want to have to jump on a relatively new bandwagon to support the concept of sandboxed Flatpak things. That also inherently assumes that your app can even work well with a Flatpak, which it may very well not be able to. So this would be 39. I think we could do better if we summoned the next guy. Let's see. So we were saying between these two, this would have done 39. If we take this, we'll do 53. Just not doing that trick is probably something that hurt me in many cases when playing this deck in the previous years. But yeah, the window layout, I'm halfway through the process of writing my own custom script, and I'll probably publish if I can get it to work, to just move the on-screen keyboard downward a little bit because it is awkwardly not taking up the right amount of space, and awkwardly the on-screen keyboard that Valve includes is just not at the right ratio. It's not at the right geometry to the size of the Steam OLED, which I think has always been 1280 by 800. There are major problems with 1280 by 800. Yes, at some point in the far distant past, we would have 320 by 200 screens. Those mostly would have been text terminals with no expectation of graphics. 640 by 480 for gaming and things at one point was very much a standard, and then frankly there was never a lot of consistency between resolutions until we got to something like 720p or 1080p, really more 1080p than anything else. 800 by 600 is something you would definitely hope for, but a lot of the monitors there, even trying to attain 800 by 600, since monitors were basically coming from the technology of 512 lines in a TV screen. The 512 lines was such the standard that even getting it to 600 lines on one side was not consistently supported. And then eventually we just got to 1080p TVs, and once we got to 1080p TVs, the technology had been so established that monitors could do 1080p easily, and now the technology is so established it is practically nothing to have a monitor support even higher resolutions. A lot of that also comes down to video processing and just having fast enough connections between the monitor and the TV and the computer, because yeah, it's not like the connectors before HDMI or in any way consistent or in any way fast enough to send that much bandwidth. Even now, we're potentially going to run into limitations of sending bandwidth, high bandwidth video, higher bandwidth. The good news is I don't think too many people are going to care or try for 8K or higher resolutions. But yeah, to get back to the Steam Deck, which is, again, I'm going to just ramble about this for probably a few weeks at most, and then hopefully I'll get away from it. The 1280 by 800 resolution that monitor has is very odd. It's very stretched out, where the desktop does not really do anything for that. It has a touchscreen in it, so the icons kind of need to be very big, or you're just abandoning the touchscreen in a lot of menus in favor of using the keyboard and mouse. And there's just kind of a noticeable difference when there really shouldn't be a noticeable difference between here is a window that is intended for you to use a touchscreen on versus here is a window that you're intended to use the mouse mode on. One example of that is the KDE Plasma calculator app, Calc, K-A-L-K. Like, it's one of the few calculators you can install via FlatHub, and it is in no way designed or getting any kind of assistance by the setup to be big enough to use as a touchscreen. It just pops up in the top left corner by default, and it pops up in a size that is about a quarter as big as it should be. It definitely isn't trying to stretch itself vertically, and it's not inherently launching itself maximized so it's stretched vertically and horizontally. Now, there is a setup for every window in KDE, which has basically no settings except for one special setting Steam has made for the overlay keyboard, to move windows around and resize them. But it is a difficult process, and you have to experiment and try and figure out what you're supposed to do to get it to work. And it took me probably an hour or two to set up the calculator so it would be big enough and in the right hand side, which makes a lot more sense. I always expect a calculator to be where a number pad is on a computer, and I always expect calculators to be right-handed. I'm not sure they've ever really made that many left-handed calculators, and if they did, you'd have to move all the numbers around, because the intention is to have your first three fingers, your pointer, middle, and ring finger, on the home rows of 3, 5, and 3, 4, and 5, or no, it'd be 4, 5, and 6. And then have your thumb on the 0, because you'd be using the 0 way more often if you were doing accounting. This is all just 10 key stuff that it is questionable how much 10 key. I should have summoned that actually. Yeah, it is fairly questionable just how much 10 key you really need to do or know. As far as accounting goes, I'm not sure how much people are typing in numbers at all versus versus the information just coming in digitally. But yeah, the calculator layout is what it is, and it definitely makes more sense to me for it to be stretched horizontally and to the right. So have the windows start in the top right corner and stretch out the buttons, which dynamically adjust, which is a nice thing about the GTK and QT programming interfaces, both of which compete as in Linux and work fairly well. This, I think, may... Yeah, I can't special summon any monsters. Yeah. So... I don't know what to do here. Actually, I think I'm just screwed. I'm gonna have to get that one spell card that I have, and that's basically it. I need to be able to negate this ability to do any of my gameplay strategy. Should have put this in defense mode. It's not gonna have any value otherwise. Should just put them both in defense mode. Yep. But yeah, with it being such a wide thing, it would make some sense to put things in columns. But honestly, if you split 1280 in half, which is your best bet, you're going to have one window that is going to be 640 and one window that's 640. So you could do 640 by 800, and that's just going to be a awkward size. Like, yes, side-by-side windows do make a little bit of sense, but that's about it. Can we special summon anything? No. So, I think I've kind of lost here. So much of my strategy is around special summoning things. From the extra stack. Guess maybe if I tossed, let's see if we can do this. Yeah, that didn't do anything. That did not work at all. I think this highlights a problem with most collectible card games, is that there's just very often not a way to chip away at these perfect defenses or good defenses. There's no way to change the course of the game, regardless of how many things I can summon. It'd be kind of nice if I could do some damage and put things in damage states, where if I attacked with here I would take some physical damage, life point damage, but then this would be in a damage state, and let's just say half of its life attack power was reduced. Then it would be an 1100 or 25 attack, which I could then attack with the 1200 to defeat. Let's see, is there anything else I want to really say about the Steam Deck? There is still some like major space issues, and I'm noticing with my backup, like, but with setting up Border backup, there's definitely some things that you need to exclude as far as trying to back up games installed by Steam, which are going to be basically pointless, backing up the trash folder, which is going to be basically pointless. Things like that. But yeah, there is also a point here to take note on, that if you are running EmuDeck, it is going to put all of your ROMs in the home folder, so you're probably going to want to not back up that either. And yeah, it is just kind of questionable so far. I haven't found a good setup here where you can have particularly old ROMs. It would make a lot of sense to have them on a micro SD card instead of being in your home folder on your main computer. It doesn't make any sense, I think, to me to try and install any Steam games, modern games, on the micro SD card, or do anything else really with the micro SD card. It's not even a good source for backing up things. Now, one benefit you'll have if you were coming from the RetroPie concept is that there was a decent amount of space being taken up on a micro SD card for the Linux operating system of RetroPie and Raspbian. This is the actual name of it. Yeah, I think it was built on Raspbian at least. So you would have some savings there. But right now, the Emulation Station Desktop Edition feels clunky and sluggish, and the first 5 minutes I spent, which is all I really spent around looking at. Oh man, if I just didn't have this card on the field, I could have done something. Yeah, the first 5 minutes of looking at the Pegasus front end definitely does not impress. It moves smoother, but there's just a lack of real settings and features. There's quite a few features missing compared to RetroPie in the desktop edition of Emulation Station anyways. So a big part of that certainly is that it's just not set up for you to turn on Bluetooth or update system settings from Emulation Station. All of that's missing. But there's an incompatibility, it seems, with the themes, so there's less themes there. And so it's questionable whether it's worth using either Pegasus or Emulation Station over just directly launching every single game via RetroArch and not using a front end at all, and just instead having Steam links directly to each game. which that's going to get fairly overwhelming fairly quickly. But one of the things I'm thinking about on the Steam Deck is I'm trying to make a build here that would just polish a lot of it. The thought there is what is the new person's experience, the new kid, the new adult's experience going to be with the Steam Deck? If you were in this awkward, weird position where you bought a Steam Deck and had no Steam account, which would be weird to do, but it's got to be what Valve wants to see happen, is that they want to see people who have only played a little games or have just never played any games make the Steam Deck their second console, their first console even. And so in that process, this was the card I needed earlier on. But I'm not going to make it. I can activate the spell. But yeah, I heavily question what you could really do to make the Steam Deck a desirable product at its price point if you don't have a Steam account, if you don't have any games on the Steam account. Yeah. And old ROMs and emulation, if you're okay with emulation, would be one thing, but it is a far cry difference, certainly, from buying a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus or Raspberry Pi 4 even. I don't think we're up to Raspberry Pi 5s yet. It's a far cry of spending the $150 it would probably take you to get all the equipment and plugs and cases needed to do that, and micro SD card included in that price, to build a RetroPie setup and emulate a lot of old games, than to spend $600 on a Steam Deck OLED, or even, let's face it, maybe you could spend $300 on the cheapest of Steam Decks to then put a bunch of ROMs and emulators on it. Now, in fairness, the Steam Deck is a much more powerful, much more modern computer compared to the RetroPie, which is not really a standard x86 computer. It is a computer of some sorts, but it is definitely not anywhere as powerful. So things like GameCube games and newer are at least on the table of actually being able to be emulated, where RetroPie will barely be able to emulate Nintendo 64 games, and very often will fail even at that. At a certain level, even if you did buy the cheapest Steam Deck for 64 gigabytes of space, that would still be not enough space for just putting ROMs on it. It would be tight if you wanted to put a lot of ROMs on it. So it's just not really a good offering. Much better to get away from the ROM issue and the emulation issue and just play desktop Linux games and use it as a computer. And that's a almost decent idea, except for the problem that the Steam Deck is very much designed so it always boots into the gaming mode first. As far as I can tell, I looked at the BIOS, and the UEFI is technically what it is, and there are a few settings and things there where you could have it boot off of a USB stick and things like that, but there really isn't a lot of settings. Interesting, in the UFEI, it says that the RAM speed is 6,400 megahertz, which is incredibly fast RAM speed. And I can only assume that means that it is sharing its RAM with the embedded graphics card, and it is benefiting if those numbers are true, which is perhaps an if. Yeah, it must be sharing the RAM between the graphics card and the PC, which is not something that most gaming PCs can do. But yeah, if it really is that fast, then I would have to say the CPU is possibly not fast enough, because there still is a decent amount of loading that you would half expect to not be there. I totally screwed up there. But yeah, there's that speed was shocking to see, but it's also kind of irritating that there just isn't more options in the UFEI. It does have, it seems like at least, a trusted platform module installed, which for Linux I have no idea what that really is doing for you. It is probably very much just the case that that is the new standard and default, is to have that integrated into modern computers. I imagine they thought maybe there would be a case where you'd want to at some point install some Windows operating system, which I don't know how you'd really want to do that, or how you would do it. Everything is so locked down. Like, when I had messed up the desktop, thankfully I was able to restore a backup, but that was also a concern that I didn't fully research. It's just, what happens if you totally screw up the desktop mode or the gaming mode somehow? How do you go into a recovery and refresh or reset? Because that didn't really look like it's in the UEFI. The UEFI, I think is what it actually is, stands for. I was able to make a user account, but I haven't experimented anymore with it. I'm very much in flux, doing several different things and trying to get the minor annoyances of the keyboard, or the major annoyances of the keyboard, let me say this correctly, fixed before I start to go into deeper dives and nerdier things. There's several educational apps. I'm trying and installing a whole bunch of apps just to see how that actually might work, and one of them is a resistor color band educational software, and at this point I think it's time to give up the ghost on that being relevant information. The truth is, nobody is repairing or working on TVs, and even if you, or electronics in general, not only TVs, and even if you were working on electronics in general, the idea that you would run into resistors that are color banded is pretty low, because nowadays much more, almost all circuitry is using surface mounted resistors that just say a number on them. So it'll say like 100, and that'll mean 100 ohms, I think is how the surface mounting resistors work. And you just don't run into resistors that much because resistors were very much used originally for analog circuitry, and almost nothing is analog. And even if you were using resistor for digital circuitry, which you might do, it is just not something that's likely to be the broken part. If anything, it'll be the broken part because it's desoldered or disconnected. It's not going to be the broken part because the resistor burnt out or needs to be replaced. Yeah, so nobody's fixing broken cell phones by desoldering resistors. People are fixing broken cell phones by removing entire broken screens or massive chip packages. A significant amount of resistors are built into the integrated chips these days and don't need a resistor for any reason. A lot of that also comes down to the fact that you're just using less starting input voltage. You have a battery giving you 5 volts. You don't need a resistor to reduce that 5 volts down to anything more than just 3.3 or maybe 1.8 is the new standard that they're going to try and move to. Whereas technology in the old days, you plug into a wall outlet that has 120 volts, and then you would use a transformer potentially to transfer that from 120 AC to something like 12 volts DC to start with, and then you would try and reduce the 12 volts by 7 volts to get it down to 5 volts. Another educational thing that I certainly always had a fascination with when I was a kid, but I think it's probably time to give the ghost up on too, is Morse code. Just because, yeah, nobody needs to know Morse code these days. Even people in the Navy are just typing in messages into programs that are converting it to Morse code, and then they are using cameras on programs and devices to translate the Morse code back into readable text. So yeah, I'm trying to be more realistic about what it would actually be educational. There's some other cases of that also, where there was like one app that said it would teach kids how to make video games, but immediately it just wants you to sign into a service, and anything that's just going to be by default to sign into a service is going to be a no-go for me. So this got rid of all of their cards, but also gave him a 7,500 defense, 5,000 defense, 7,000 attack. I'm not sure I have anything else to say about the Steam Deck, which is fine. I'm already talking about it too much. But yeah, I'm still very much working on it. Now, most people, the thing I haven't really worked on probably want some testament to how well the games actually play. And I guess the one thing I can say is that I spent maybe 5 minutes playing A Hat in Time, doing one level, and yeah, it seems like it plays smoothly and it looks nice. There's particularly going to probably be cases where you need to go in and change the settings when you play on the Steam Deck versus if you played the game previously. Like change the settings, lower the graphics, lower the resolution, just get it running at a more reasonable scale, but it looks like it's doing 60 frames per second perfectly fine. It feels, Hat Time felt very much as smooth as it did playing on my main computer. Now I tried to play Antichamber. Antichamber is a game that has more of a mouse and keyboard setup. So in that case, either because of my own setup, so just at random, it wanted to have the start menu bar in the foreground and put Antichamber as a window behind it, which created a problem in that it was not recognizing the mouse and keyboard controls, and so I had to struggle to click on the touchscreen to then enter into Antichamber's window and get focus. And once I gained focus, then I could have controls. But if I hadn't figured that out, I also wouldn't have had any way of exiting Antichamber. So it is very much going to be a per game basis as far as what works and what doesn't, with a big caveat being that a lot of games aren't going to play well without connecting either a mouse or keyboard externally or an external controller. Which, yeah. In the case of 10 Million as a game, that's an example of a game that you could play on the touchscreen, but it would be far too slow and you wouldn't make any progress in the later levels. So I would say that that is a great example of something where you would have to connect an external mouse and keyboard. On that aspect, there is an application I have on my cell phone that will turn my cell phone over Bluetooth into a mouse and keyboard, and that does work. That is certainly a weird setup, however, because in that weird setup you would be using a cell phone screen, which is much smaller, to send mouse and keyboard signals over Bluetooth, which is going to be slow, to the Steam Deck, which is in almost every scenario capable of having a mouse and keyboard input in a better form factor. Mostly the Bluetooth mouse and keyboard app on my cell phone is for things like the Chromecast, which has no other way of getting a keyboard and mouse connected to it. Well, I think there is a way if you had a power pass-through or power delivering hub plugged into it. Yep. I'm still trying to experiment to see if you could send files by default through Bluetooth versus using an application like Local Send. It is a little bit of a hassle to tell somebody that you've got to download Local Send first to send files. Even though Local Send does have the extra benefit of being able to send files via Wi-Fi and to devices that won't need Bluetooth, like computers, and just your standard desktop computer is not likely to have Bluetooth. So yeah, I'm still experimenting with that, and there's a few other tweaks. There is another complaint I certainly can make, in that it feels like some applications just sometimes disappear from the menu, from the start menu, or there's just not an easy way to uninstall applications. It just doesn't feel like they've fully gotten a bug-free experience as far as KDE Plasma and how it installs applications and how it uninstalls applications. I'm not sure if the Flat Hub Discover app is what it's called. Not sure if it really supports package lists, which would probably be helpful to be able to just make a package list and copy to a new install, just reinstalling all of those same applications instead of copying over the pre-installed applications by copying the entire home folder. Although in the totality of it, it is just more efficient to copy over the home folder and hope that causes no problems. I think my stomach is growling in a very weird way. Probably could think of other things to talk about on this about the Steam Deck, but it's probably better to move on. I definitely am still just considering whether I could make enough suggestions and tips as far as making a series of videos. Like, that's inherently what I would like to do, is make a series of shorter videos around the Steam Deck, but it would definitely be closer to my nature to make instead one long rambling video just covering everything about the Steam Deck. Okay, how do we want to handle this? Let's just do it that way. YouTube had a video about a new product manager, which I suspect she is the new product manager, not project manager. It was a pretty cringy interview, in my opinion. Not incredibly cringy. It could be way worse, but it is very much two people at YouTube talking about how they love coffee and oat milk as one of their interview questions that gets left into the footage, instead of that being something that would have been edited out. And in particular, when she's talking about what she actually does, she uses this interesting phrase, deep work, which deep work, I suspect, means the actual work that most people usually do is considered deep work, because everything not described as deep work was very much just doing things that aren't really what you would call work. And then there was just another question about, like, what celebrities have you met. It is very much a case of just, these are California shallow, selfish people that definitely makes up the face. Probably not the bulk of people that actually work at YouTube, but it makes up the face of YouTube. And yeah, she didn't really say anything much. She talks about how she's met celebrities like Mr. Beast was one of the names I recognized. She named several other people, name dropping very much California things. And in name dropping and saying how she's met them, she talks about how she likes talking to the people who really use their product, i.e. YouTube, which there's very little, I think, that you should be focusing your attention on as far as major successes like Mr. Beast. You shouldn't be making YouTube easier for Mr. Beast. If anything, you should probably be making YouTube more difficult for the most successful people, in favor of making the middle level content creators, if not also the lower level content creators, be better served. One of my hopes here is with a lot of YouTubers announcing retirements, and there is perhaps going to be a realization that YouTube is going to have to make to say that they are going to have to support smaller content creators more and more. I want to see messaging from YouTube that is much more, we have over 10,000 content creators that have over 1 million subscribers, instead of messaging like Mr. Beast has 10 million subscribers, or has reached 10 million subscribers. Yeah. But yeah, really the interview didn't say anything and didn't in any way sway me to this new content creator. Which, no surprise there, frankly. If there was a radical revolutionary in YouTube, they would have to be very sneaky about how they did it, or they would just get ostracized and probably fired before they actually could affect any real change, unless it's just somehow somebody gets totally in charge of YouTube that's new and a radical revolutionary. And that's highly unlikely to happen. Okay, so as far as news goes, the clips did work in the last stream. Although, did I actually run that macro, or was that for the stream before the last stream? That's an interesting question. Yeah, I may have not run clips, even though they did work for the last stream. The chapters, the problem with the chapters is I mistyped it. Mistyped what would have been the variable name in 2 different ways, and I only recognized that I had mistyped it in one way, and yeah, pretty obviously I was probably half asleep in the middle of that process. So if I've gotten the spelling correctly, we will have real chapters. I'm still not sure how chapters are really going to play out, though, as a concept. Because to input the chapters, it's going to probably be a fairly manual process for every live stream and for every upload of that same video later on. That's something I still fairly unhappy about with YouTube, is that there really is just no way to replace live streams with uploads of the same video, even though they could compare the size of the file, they could compare the time of the file, they could compare major sections of the file, and just, yeah. Although it is, I guess, unknown to me as to whether there is an easy way to compare videos and be known for and know for certain whether the videos are close enough. But then there also in YouTube is just not a way to rerun old content or recommend old content. Although I'm not sure these live streams are really worth rerunning. I'd much prefer to rerun some of my older pre-recorded content and get more views on those. I think I've lost here, and this is probably the last game I'll play. Yep, I've lost. So GameDeveloper.com says the Hellgate London alum Bill Roper has co-founded a new studio called Lunacy Games. This is another one of these headlines that I hate, where you're taking a person and then mostly trying to get them more coverage by connecting it to a game, which perhaps it should very much just be rephrased. Bill Roper, comma, or parentheses, Hellgate London, close parentheses, co-founds a new studio at Lunacy Games. On the other hand, I do want to see game developers get credited, but the truth of it is, when you look at like the sub-headline here, Roper worked on games including Diablo, Disney Infinity, and Champions Online, which really tells you nothing as far as what his actual input on any of those games were, or how much of any of those games would have been more of a success or less of a success had he not been involved in them. So I think it's probably more helpful to simply say Bill Roper co-founds a new studio called Lunacy Games, and then ideally you would have a website where you could click on his name to get his resume. So did we get all the daily quests? Pretty much, yep. And maintenance notice. I imagine what's going to happen is that tomorrow and the next day, or between tomorrow and the next day, the game will update, and then we'll have some new content, or at least the beginnings of new content that's going to come out for the next month. The company head up is going to split from the Thunderful group. It's going to be sold to a company controlled by its founder. Feel like Thunderful group acquired head up at some point, but the story isn't really mentioning that, so it may have always been part of Thunderful group. This is perhaps a little too financial and inside baseball the way this article is written, but I don't really hate GameDeveloper.com for being more cold and unopinionated in their articles about this kinds of stuff. Yeah, seems like we very much are going to be seeing a lot more companies now getting sold off or getting shuttered. We're past the point of the first quarter layoffs where companies felt like they could survive by just laying off a bunch of people, and now I think we are into the beginnings of the second quarter panic where companies, parent companies, are straight up having to shut down entire companies or sell them off. And who knows what phase we'll be in the third quarter of this year. Phil Spencer is quoted in one of these articles that we're going to talk about later, blaming the layoffs on I think he uses the phrase, surprising lack of growth in the video game industry. And it's like, yeah, there should be a lack of growth in the video game industry. It's grown at pretty much as big as it can grow. That there's not that many more people that want to play video games that are going to get into the video game world, and you can't just have infinite growth because we don't have infinite money and we don't have infinite people. And unfortunately, under capitalism, there's no such thing as finding an acceptable amount of growth and just being happy with that to shareholders. Which, yeah, that's one thing. Taxation as a penalty, or taxation as a economy cooler, things like that would be possibly helpful, as is just to keep things better. Just keep things from going off the rails and demanding infinite growth. Anyways, let's move on. Nintendo of America is reportedly cutting 120 contractor roles ahead of the Switch 2's launch. While some staff will let go, others are being made full-time in the testing department restructure, which is probably the vast majority are being let go. So this is not the kind of headline you would want to put out before the Switch 2, or whatever the next Nintendo console is really called, is even launched. This is the kind of headline you would expect to hear after a month or two, a few months after the launch. If anything, this speculatively would imply that they hired a bunch of contractors to develop a new console, and now that it's developed, they don't need them anymore. And that may mean that the next console is going to be a design by committee type product, and not something that's particularly that interesting or intriguing, which is believable. But yeah, we have had way too many articles about the Switch 2 when the Switch 2 hasn't even been announced yet. That's a real problem. Let's see. The Crossfire developer Smilegate is shutting down its Barcelona studio, if I can pronounce it correctly. Let's see. Jackbox Games says they've seen an uptick in playing people claiming to be hiring for Jackbox who definitely don't work at Jackbox games, and so they wanted to just remind everybody to check their link, and if you don't see a job here, the job doesn't exist. I wouldn't be surprised if there's an uptick in scams like that. That is definitely where you would target people who are desperate to get a job. Get them to give you all of their personal information, name, phone number, social security number. Eventually you'd go for the social security, just their address, job history. Like, you can get a decent amount of personal information through a job application scam. And there definitely are job application scams out there that are straight up, we need you to give us $100 deposit for this or that or this. Alright, I'm gonna have to pause the video. I'm gonna be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Weird thing happened when I was ordering groceries where I ended up with way more groceries than I needed, and so I was giving away some food. The Kroger app is pretty terrible, I will say, and they need to improve some things, and I'm not 100% sure that it didn't just totally glitch on their back-end servers and they ordered a ridiculous amount of extra food that I hadn't actually put in the shopping list, or if what went wrong there. But yeah, that is the distraction of the day. Let's move on back to video game news though. So we were talking about how Jackbox is seeing some scammers pretending to be hiring for Jackbox, and yeah, there's a lot of job scams certainly going on, and I imagine that is only going to increase as people struggle to have good paying jobs and struggle to accomplish anything with their lives professionally, and just don't really have opportunities to actually succeed professionally. Moving on, I don't know why I even bothered following Larry Herb anymore, but here 2 hours ago he's showing from his extensive pin collection. The pin program was one of the fun projects we did over the past few years. So he's saying over the past few years, and what's interesting about that statement is it really just highlights what Larry Herb considers the past few years, because this is 9 years ago. If 2015 Gamescom is when this came out. Yeah. 9 years is not the past few years. 9 years is nearly a decade ago. Which, if anything, that might also be a highlight of just what he feels like and what he was focused on in the past decade, is that he very well may have been way too hands-off, even more than we already know he was hands-off, if he's obsessing about pins. Now, on the concept of pins, I don't hate pins, but it is very much a Boy Scout type nonsense, and nobody really cares about Boy Scouts these days, and it's military influenced. You generally don't see people wearing a bunch of pins for no good reason. But yeah, there's a level there of it needing. What am I trying to say here? I lost my train of thought halfway through that sentence. It's just swag, and in general, people don't care about swag, and it's better that people don't care about swag. Although, inherently, we haven't gone from saying we don't care about collector's editions and postcards and swag like that, but we really do care about owning our games and keeping our games. It seems like we've been convinced with a little bit of 3-card Monty trickery here to not really care about things we never cared about as far as collector's editions and swag, and also not care about actually owning your video games and having access to them, which is the one thing we should be caring about. I would like to see all the enthusiasm that people may have once had from collecting swag, pins, collector's editions, things like that, physical items of very little value or merit. I'd like to see 100% plus of that enthusiasm be put into the ideas of preservation and actually owning your games, and not allowing games to become services or games to become ruined by having a bunch of microtransactions added to them, or games just being licensed, which is the main issue, in that you never own any of it. On the other hand, I can see that kids still probably care a little bit about swag, but I imagine the newer generations of kids are increasingly uninterested in owning physical things. Dolls, toys, when they're young, certainly. Legos, yes, but going with a bunch of extra other items is not really, I think, what kids would like. They would much prefer to just have giant collections of video games than play video games. There's also a boat crashed into a bridge in Baltimore, which is probably not going to be super video game related. We'd have to figure out if there was actually any shipping lanes of anything in any way related to video games that were going either through the water channel there or the bridge driving channel there. There clearly is room for improvement on security and safety. In this case, I think it very much was a case of safety and not security. But in the aftermath of this, it's pretty obvious that had any kind of terrorist organization figured it out and wanted to do it, crashing boats into bridges would have had much more significant long-term impact on the United States, or any country, frankly, than crashing planes into buildings did in 9/11. Like, that it would have just had much more of an impact. There's, I think, roughly about 7 main bridges into Manhattan. If you could get 2 or 3 of them shut down, the amount of extra traffic would effectively cripple all of Manhattan. And if that cripples all of Manhattan, and the financial district in particular, that would have done a lot more damage. On top of which, you then could also have targeted several other ports throughout the United States that would have done the same. And yeah, it takes a lot longer to clean up and build a new bridge than it does to clean up and build a new building, new tower, new twin towers. So hopefully the people in charge are wise. They have talked about bridge and infrastructure security in the past, but there is obviously not enough safety there that a boat seemingly can just lose power and then crash. It probably is much more of a case that every single bridge crossing needs to be done by a more controlled process, and that boats are required a kilometer out to relinquish control of their vessels to a crossing authority and go through either being tugged by a tugboat that's under control, or go through a special channel to cross. and then once they're clear of the bridge, they can start moving under their own power in a similar way that, and maybe they just need some new rules and regulations around that. Of course, planes are also falling apart, Boeing planes, and so that's another example of companies trying to make the maximum amount of profit and not caring at all about quality or safety. It makes a great argument, Boeing does, for nationalizing the airlines, since they're already getting massive amounts of national funding and support, and maybe nationalize a lot of boating areas too. Anyways, that's not very video game related. It could be, though. We could find that there was thousands of pallets of video games in facilities that now cannot be shipped where they're supposed to be shipped. But it also may be that there's none of that. See, what's also funny here on Larry Herb is he said he worked at Xbox for 2 decades, and he considers 2015, 9 years ago, to be the past few years. So he is effectively saying he is not, he was not having fun, at least, with any of the projects he was doing in the second half of his entire time at Xbox. Which, in fairness, a job, particularly if you're an upper manager, is probably not going to be fun, and you can't really expect it to be fun. But yeah, he's definitely not singing his own praises there as well as he should. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says the UK Games charity Special Effect is going to receive a prestigious BAFTA special award. The award is given to those who make outstanding contributions to films, games, or television. BAFTA trying to get into being a prestigious award giver for video games, which I frankly question somewhat. I'm not even sure that BAFTA is particularly a prestigious award for UK film and television. I watched Taskmaster, and there's quite a few people that have like BAFTAs awards that they've won, and even the comedians there don't really take it that seriously, whereas Oscars don't really have that same level of derision thrown at them, or Emmys. I think Oscars and Emmys have done a much better job of pretending like they're prestigious and actually gaining some prestigiousness by pretending. But yeah, particularly in the case of video games, I have yet to see the BAFTA awards gain any momentum. But whatever. It sounds like one of those kinds of special awards that they would give to celebrate, I guess, Special Effect in this case, which is a charity. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle says Phil Spencer wants other digital storefronts like the Epic Game Store and itch.io on Xbox. Nobody would blink twice about Windows having multiple stores, the Xbox boss says. Inherently, when you combine this to the other, I want to call it just gossip, that we've heard from Phil Spencer around his laundry list of what he would like to see in a portable console. The ideas kind of contrast. The Epic Game Store on an Xbox seems fine to me. I think almost nobody would engage with that unless it just became the only way Fortnite could be played on Xbox, which I'm not sure Fortnite can be played on Xbox at the current time. But I think Microsoft would very quickly either want some licensing fees or some cut of sales if all of a sudden people were actually buying games through the Epic Games Store instead of through the Xbox storefront. Same would be true for itch.io. And inherently, if you're going to rethink and make a mobile console, they need to rethink and remake their operating system and make it very much custom for an Xbox experience. Otherwise, it's going to very much just be an also-ran. It would be very weird, although probably better in the long run, if they made a physical hardware device that just ran SteamOS and had slight tweaks and branding of Xbox on it. That would be better for the consumers. In the long run, it would be bad because you wouldn't have any exclusivity in your interface at all in branding. It would be pretty crazy if you had a Steam Deck that had Xbox branding on it, but then it booted into Steam gaming mode when you launched, and you were looking at Steam first and foremost, that you would just have no reason to ever switch to Xbox, an Xbox interface. And it would just get very much muddled if there was a heavy emphasis that you had a Steam Deck-like device, and it may start in an Xbox mode, but then it very quickly could be switched over to an Epic Games or an itch.io mode. Although I'm pretty sure you can accomplish some level of success already on the Steam Deck to get Xbox games to somewhat play and install the Epic Games Store and itch.io. So if this was the standard, if this actually did happen, then ignoring a potential handheld version of an Xbox, the current Xbox infrastructure would stand out weirdly in that case, and very likely not in a hugely positive way, because PlayStation's not going to allow the Epic Games Store and itch.io, and Nintendo's not going to allow the Epic Games Store and itch.io. And Nintendo has a great argument to not allow other stores, because they can just say, well, we're Nintendo and we make a very locked down, kid-friendly environment. Of course, Nintendo gets undercut from that messaging whenever you go on their e-store and see it full of a bunch of anime waifu games. But most parents probably don't care or know about that, so there still is very much a feeling that Nintendo is the safe, family-friendly platform, even though it's long since given up actually trying to be that. But yeah, if the Epic Games Store and itch.io came to the Xbox, it would almost certainly be part of some kind of lawsuit in which the Epic Games Store sued Sony PlayStation and Nintendo to be on their consoles too. It would create a weird precedent that if a lawsuit like that succeeded, then the question is, how small of a store would have to be allowed to be on consoles? Could you get, for instance, the Nunchaku storefront, which sells exclusively adult games? Would Nunchaku storefront all of a sudden have to be on the PlayStation and the Nintendo and the Switch and the Xbox? There is an argument overall that maybe that should be the way it is that consumers should be allowed to have freedom of storefront choice and freedom of expression through being expanded as a concept into storefront choices. But yeah, we haven't really gotten that far as far as court cases. Moving on, we already talked about the report that Nintendo of America is laying off contractors ahead of a Switch 2 launch. Although I did not see in the previous article that it was Nintendo of America, which is a different situation, but it probably is just a situation that is reflecting what has already happened or is going to happen in Japan. The contractors for Nintendo of America would be very much testers or localizers and second string, if not third or fourth tier employees as far as Nintendo of Japan is concerned. I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo of Japan hires very little contractors so they don't have to lay them off in Japan, and they can maintain that they've never fired anybody myth that a lot of Japanese companies like to make, and then they can just have the American company do all the testing and work. Hardware testing and Wi-Fi testing in particular probably makes a lot of sense to be tested in the United States, in North America in particular, because there's just going to be different kinds of buildings and large land masses and things like that, where in Japan I wouldn't be surprised if it's a much easier infrastructure as far as Wi-Fi and things like that. I know the frequencies are different between Japan and America, I think, but for Wi-Fi. But yeah, I imagine there aren't too many places in Japan where you would get spotty or low quality Wi-Fi compared to places in America. But yeah, I imagine that really isn't a good enough argument to have more contractors in America than in Japan. Moving on. Let's see. Free Radical's Steve Ellis looks back on an attempted Time Splitters revival. This is a great example from GameDeveloper.com of an article that could be fairly evergreen, and that you might just do this article and sit on it until you have nothing else to talk about, because I really don't think this kind of retrospective article, just talking to somebody talking about a failed revival, makes a lot of sense. And we've seen several articles talking about the attempted Time Splitters game. Definitely he's talking about it. Steve Ellis is talking about it because he wants to see if somebody would fund the development of a new Time Splitters game, and just imagine that's never going to happen. The PlayStation Store's spring sale includes thousands of discounted games, according to Video Games Chronicle, if that's interesting. And Sony has been declared a winner in a $500 million patent infringement suit. Genuine Enabling Technology filed its suit against Sony in 2017, claiming PlayStation consoles and controllers communicate in a way similar to an idea patented in 2001. So one would assume that genuinely enabling technology didn't actually act on whatever this patent was, or this patent was junk for Sony to win, but it may very well just be a case that Sony had more money. See, method and apparatus for producing a combined data stream and recovering therefrom the respective user input stream and at least one input signal. That is the kind of long-winded description you'll see in a patent. It claimed PlayStation consoles communicated with controllers using slow varying signals for button inputs and high frequency motion signals that they previously developed, which inherently having a patent for a method to send signals sounds like a very bunk claim, that, and something that really shouldn't just be patented. In court, Sony argued that they didn't provide enough evidence to prove a component of its controller was structurally equivalent to diagrams within the patent, which is interesting, the argument to say that it would have to be structurally equivalent to the diagrams in the patent. The judge agreed, stating that GET failed to raise a dispute of fact. Sony didn't infringe on those patents, the judge said, and the case was subsequently closed. Git also filed a similar suit against Nintendo in 2020, claiming it also infringed on its patents. The judge sided with Nintendo, but that decision was reversed in 2020, and the case is now ongoing. So definitely sounds like Git is more of a patent troll than genuine enabling technology, is more of a patent troll than an actual acting company, particularly since I've never heard of this company, and they definitely aren't making any controllers that I know of, any kind of like third-party controllers or any kind of console. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't be a patent troll going after video game companies. They have fairly deep pockets. It would be much easier to go after middle and small companies otherwise. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says Sega of America union workers have secured raises and layoff protections with the first collectively bargained contract. I said a few weeks ago that the very first step after a company gets unionized, that people sign the union cards, and after the inevitable fight of the company to ignore and not recognize the union. So I guess this would technically be the third step in unionization, would be to actually negotiate that first contract, which inherently the first contract is supposed to be the worst contract, and over the years you will argue for improvements on the contract. And raises aren't inherently always included, but layoff protections definitely have to be part of that first contract. Otherwise, it's a pretty useless contract. If all of a sudden the company, Sega of America, could just fire everybody in the union, then your union falls apart. So, yeah. And this is two of the basic things you want, is you want layoff protections and better pay, or better pay sometimes is in the case of better healthcare. Unfortunately, companies control healthcare. There is a possibility, certainly, that a union could try and negotiate for a healthcare plan and offer its own healthcare plan, but the union often doesn't get as good of offerings or can't negotiate as well as a corporation can. Although ideally, none of this should have anything to do with what unions are doing or businesses are doing. The next step is probably further away for a union now, as far as they're just going to have to make sure nothing weird is happening and that there aren't some major retaliations happening from Sega of America. And that they aren't trying to lay off or get rid of the union. This is definitely the early beginnings still of a union, and they just need to grow and strengthen themselves. But yeah, I would say retirement, pensions, things like that. You form a new union, you're going to want to start funding that pension as quickly as possible. You're going to want to start funding the strike fund as quickly as possible. But yeah, and you're going to definitely want more healthcare and more retirement, and those are things that are notably missing in this headline, probably in part because this union is made up of fairly young, healthy people who are not thinking in the long run. If the game industry is going to be an industry that actually works, it's got to be like a lot of other industries, which needs to accommodate older people and unhealthy people instead of being discriminatory against those types of people. And the game industry at the moment is extremely discriminatory against those type of people, and it needs to create a future where somebody could be a game tester when they are 18 years old, maybe even 16 or 17 years old, and work at that job and succeed at that job and stay at that job until they are 65 to 70 years old, whenever a retirement age is reasonable to be set. Honestly, retirement age is should just be lowered in general. That is something nobody ever talks about, by the way, as far as if there aren't enough jobs around, why don't we find a way to lower the retirement age and just have younger people who are 60 or 55 retire and still be taken care of. That's a concept nobody wants to fund or do anything with, obviously. But yeah, right now it is not the situation that you could be a game tester and stay as a game tester, never getting a promotion, which you're not likely to get promotions as a game tester until you're 65, 70, ready to retire. And so that is where unions need to think in the long term. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says a game called Marvel Rivals has been revealed as a 6 versus 6 team shooter from Call of Duty and Battlefield developers. It definitely feels like it is trying to do something like Overwatch, except for with Marvel, and certainly something like that would have made more sense years ago when Marvel was at its heyday. Now it's kind of harder to make that argument. These characters look interesting enough, certainly, as far as concept art, but yeah, I definitely am not willing to. Let's see what this looks like. I'm really not willing to make that same. I shouldn't even show that in the Marvel loading screen. I'm not willing to make the same mistake that I did with Marvel Snap, which the thought on Marvel Snap was that a card game made by the Ben Brode, the creator of Hearthstone, or at least the guy who sells himself as the creator of Hearthstone, that with Marvel branding around it, that would be a surefire hit and everybody would want to play it. And that's just not what happened with Marvel Snap, because inherently Marvel Snap was just too weird of a game. I won't even really say it's a bad game, I'll just say it was too different of a type of card game for people to be happy enough with it and want to keep on playing it. Looking at this looks like it could be Overwatch, with a lot of environmental destruction being highlighted too. But I'm not sure people really want Overwatch. And perhaps with Marvel, you're opening up a weird door that Overwatch didn't have, in that there will be very few people who want to play as like Magic or Luna Snow, which is a character I don't even know. I don't even recognize. There's Galacticia, the daughter of Galactus, a lesser character. They are seemingly stretching here to have more female heroes in the game. But yeah, perhaps with that issue of everybody wanting to play as Iron Man, you'll have nobody wanting to play as Luna Snow. I don't even know who Penny Parker is. I barely know Magic. And the Galactus's daughter, who I don't really even know her name, I don't think is even listed as a playable character. And you would think in the Marvel universe, in particular, you would have the character, one of the characters that created created a scenario, a war world where people are fighting each other, and that would be the main guy running the show. I forget the name of who that was. In one of them, it was like the Beyonder, I think, that did it, but I'm thinking of a different character. Yeah, I'm not willing to say just because it has Marvel in it that it will be successful, and I'm also not willing to say that Overwatch type games even make sense or work. Particularly when you think of the history of player versus player games and how successful just a well polished and well populated, I guess is the word to use, game like the Call of Duty games are. It's like Call of Duty doesn't have any unique characters per se, and yet people play it like crazy just because that's where everybody is, and that may also be part of the problem against any new game. Apparently it will be free to play, so expect microtransactions or grind, I would suspect. Let's see. Next we have a GameDeveloper.com article saying GameStop has committed to layoffs despite concerns over business quote strain. The retailer said job cuts are part of the strategic plan to achieve profitability. Despite people on Reddit trying to prevent GameStop from falling apart and selling itself and going bankrupt, it seems to me like GameStop is still very much being run by people who don't really care to make it successful. And at a certain point, if they can make a decent argument to me that layoffs need to happen, that would be great, but I just don't really believe it. I think GameStop is very much not doing the on the ground type changes that it needs to do to make itself be more successful. And as such, I cannot think of any good reason why I would want to order anything online from GameStop.com, which their website is a little bad, or go into an actual GameStop store versus going into like Walmart or a Target. Yeah. At a certain point, GameStop almost feels like it should be selling ice cream or burgers and fries. Something that kids would want to make them come into the store every now and then. Or it should just be a place where you go and with a Power Plus or Power Up plan, whatever it's called, you can just sit in the GameStop stores and play video games and just make it a gaming center as such, and a monthly subscription to let kids go hang out at this somewhat safe place that also sells games, but barely even cares about that. That might be the direction GameStop should go. It's a little crazy that GameStop never got into comic books or Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering, because that's the direction that those kinds of companies should go, is that you're going to have your loyal audience, and you're going to try and create a loyal audience that comes back on every one day out of every week. And very much like the comic book shop, that the people that are going to play Magic the Gathering on a weekly basis, or the people that are going to play Dungeons and Dragons, they are mostly your consistent income, that they're buying something new every time they're coming in, whereas GameStop has nobody that's coming in on a weekly basis really and buying something new. They're getting kids coming in when there's a new game coming in, or when it's their birthday at best. But yeah, there's definitely room for rethinking it. And yeah, there's too many GameStop stores. They don't make sense in their size and shape. They don't make sense the way they hire employees and keep employees. They don't make sense that they don't have more swag. If people are going to buy swag, there's a lot of swag online. You would think their online store would have more of it available. They probably should just be full of clothing, where kids would go and get video game t-shirts and just t-shirts in general. If it was half Hot Topic, half GameStop, that would make a lot of sense. Instead of just staying in that one industry, Like, what other kind of business exists today? What kind of store exists today where it's literally selling just one type of product? Clothes stores are selling shirts and pants and socks and maybe underwear even. Those are at least slightly different types of products, where GameStop is just video games focused. And even a standard clothes shop is usually not what you would want to do compared to a supermarket, where, like Walmart or Target, where there's different sections. It's like, why aren't there Legos more prominent in GameStops as far as other toys? Why aren't there board games? Make it a full-on toy store at the very least. That would make the most sense. Like, license out Toys R Us, change half of the GameStops to be Toys R Us, have some GameStops labeled as GameStops to be mostly games, and then have some GameStops labeled as Toys R Us to be smaller areas full of toys. Anyways, I guess I could continue rambling on, but yeah. I don't think anybody's really satisfied with the way GameStop is running its business, which is not, I guess, that different from most businesses. Nobody's really satisfied how General Mills is running their business either. Moving on. Apparently, a Game Boy Advance game is being added to the Nintendo Switch Online called F-Zero Maximum Velocity on March 29th. I have never heard of this game before, but I guess that's not super surprising either. I wasn't really following Game Boy Advance games or F-Zero as a series. Let's see. IGN has this article talking to Ken Levine as far as the next game he's making, Judas. This is yet another article talking about a game when the game should either be released at this point or should just be cancelled. Ken Levine is taking forever, and this is a very long article as we scroll down here, allowing Ken Levine to basically explain why it's taking forever. And I just don't care one bit to read something like this. This is still going. As far as the concept of digital Legos, how that really gets applied, or how the game actually ends up. I'm willing to play the game Judas when it comes out, but I'm not willing to do anything else. The phrase narrative Legos, I half expect means that depending on who you talk to, there will be different branching paths. And so if you talk to one person, the story will go in one way. If you talk to another person, the story will go in another way. And more than likely, you'll see most of the content. Here you have Jeff Keighley also on this interview, which seems kind of ridiculous for him to be that in the middle there. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you see most of the content and it mostly doesn't change too much. Making a game that actually could split its directions and talking to one person first makes them the bad guy versus talking to a different person makes them the bad guy doesn't really work. We've seen that kind of in the most recent Alone in the Dark game, which noticeably nobody has said anything about the most recent Alone in the Dark game lately. But yeah, if you play as the male character, the story is slightly different, but not significant to a point where anybody cares, versus playing as the female character. If the narrative Legos changed the encounters slightly. And if anything, there are definitely games that aren't first-person shooters that have done that same concept of playing a section over and over again. 999 is a great example of a game like that. It's a visual novel, but you play over a path and a branching path with certain extra bits of information, and those extra bits of information lead to different outcomes in 999. But yeah, it's pointless to let Ken Levine bloviate, in particular since I really question how much he's actually contributing to the actual creation of games versus him just having very generic ideas and then making his team implement those generic ideas that are often, I suspect, way too ambitious and not really complementary to making a video game. But yeah, it's pointless to really bloviate and listen to an article like this, and we should just see what the game is. Maybe if the game came out and it was amazing, it would make some sense to maybe do some research and read the articles in a retrospect, but even then it's probably not worth it. Inherently, there is also a point to be made that gamers' experience around the game and their opinions around the game should almost 100% not be affected by articles and what the creators think. How somebody interprets a piece of art is way more important to that person than how an artist expected or explains it should be interpreted. If the Mona Lisa painter came out, if somehow they magically appeared and said, you were supposed to hate the Mona Lisa, it was intentionally painted to give you the feeling of hate and dislike and not care for it at all, that would mean absolutely nothing to every single person who has looked at the Mona Lisa and admired it. So that's just kind of useless information. And very often you have artists who expect some interpretation and fail at imbuing that interpretation into their final product, and then get surprised when people interpret it completely different. The Scream is kind of a great example of that. The vast majority of people see the painting The Scream and interpret it as the character in the painting screaming, when it is, to my understanding at least, actually the case that it is supposed to be a painting, kind of a self-portrait of the character in the painting hearing voices and hearing a scream that was not there. Thus they're covering their ears. But most people don't see it that way. Is one interpretation more valid than the other? No. Art is inherently subjective and should be subjective. Anyways, let's move on. So here's the article I mentioned earlier. Xbox claims mass layoffs were the outcome of a, quote, concerning lack of industry growth. There's just no more room for the industry to grow. If you were to talk about growth on a biological level, and think about that, if you have a 1 by 1 foot plot of land, you can only grow so many plants, flowers, fruits, vegetables on that 1 by 1 foot of land. Nothing is going to make you have more land in the short term, and that's pretty much it for the video game industry. There's not a lot of other people out there that want to get into gaming, and laying off people is not actually going to fix that problem in any ways. It might be an adjustment that's made to say that the industry is just not going to grow, but they're not making that claim. They're just saying we still expect the industry to grow, it's just not doing it right now. This is almost the kind of things that Phil Spencer should probably be saying, which is that the market is fully saturated and fully matured, and that that shareholders should not expect any more growth. But that's the kind of things that also would have him get voted out or laid off by shareholders. The real move here is not to lay off 8% of the employees. The move here is to buy back stock and get rid of shareholders. That fixes the problem. Laying off employees here is just going to have you have less employees, which maybe you needed them, maybe they were the wrong employees. That is definitely an argument to be made, but you don't typically do layoffs just to target bad employees. You do layoffs to target random employees. But yeah, the right move, in my opinion, would be to do a stock buyback. Get rid of shareholders, take Microsoft as a company private, and then you don't have to worry about it. And then you have a company like Valve. And noticeably, Valve was created by an ex-Microsoft employee who, while Valve has many problems about how it's set up and who's actually running it, it is noticeable that we have not heard, I can't recall of a time, of Valve actually laying off anybody. And it would be certainly big news if Valve did lay off 8% of its employees. And I just don't think that I don't think that's going to happen. Valve has been massively successful in running a storefront and occasionally making a game or two and making the Steam Deck. They've been less successful with other Steam machines, which were failures, and VR, which is mediocre as far as its level of success. Valve noticeably also, though, because they're run the way they are not trying to acquire a bunch of other companies, and they're not trying to have any kind of exclusive games or have acquisitions of other game companies so that they can constantly put out games. It might be nice if Valve acquired a game company or two and then ran those game companies in a way that they actually had to make games, which is something I think they claimed they were going to do, but I really don't think that actually was accomplished. But yeah, they acquired, I think, the Firewatch developers and didn't really do anything with them. As probably the most recent company they've acquired, and that was quite a while ago. Moving on, the Arctic Camo Special Edition controller is now available worldwide. This was leaked earlier, although noticeably the leak was showing a very different screenshot. Actually, this may be a different skin than the one that was leaked earlier, but whatever. Yeah. Looking at these buttons on the Xbox, they are just significantly bigger than the ones on the Steam Deck. That's something to consider. The start select buttons, as they used to be called, are longer, elongated buttons, closer to what the share button is. There is no share button on the Steam Deck. Yeah, that's probably fine. There's no Xbox connecting button. That's fine. It would be nice if the Steam Deck could act as a wireless controller with some kind of Bluetooth dongle. I don't think it can, which that kind of sucks because it would certainly add a small amount of value if you could use it as a controller to play games on a PC, and then you wouldn't have to buy third-party Xbox or PlayStation controllers, and generally you still would. We're still in a point where Xbox controllers will be a little bit better on Windows. I would have thought I was going to really hate the analog stick layout on the Steam Deck, and no, I'm not really having any problems with it yet. I kind of don't like that it is an old school plus D-pad, directional pad. instead of a more rounded D-pad on the Steam Deck, but it would be hard to fit a rounded D-pad on the Steam Deck since everything is really getting squished in for those touchpads, which I wouldn't be surprised if the Steam Deck is really just trying to backdoor everybody into just getting really used to using the touchpads, although I question how many games really could be played with the touchpads. There are touch sensors on the analog joysticks, so there's a way I saw, I haven't played with it, to have gyroscope controls only when you're touching the thumbstick. So if you have your finger on one of the thumbsticks, you can tilt the camera or tilt the Steam Deck to move in certain ways. I question how many games would have gyroscope support, particularly considering it's mostly disabled by default. It is certainly a thought. And then the L3 and L4 buttons are questionable as far as just the back triggers and how they are formed, and how useful they really would be. It definitely feels like I prefer some kind of locking indentation groove on the L3 and L4 where I know my fingers are going to rest naturally on those buttons. And even then, those fingers are just not the fingers I've ever trained, so I really wouldn't expect to accomplish too much using those buttons, but I have pushed them a lot, mostly though to just figure out if there's some kind of keyboard combination for something to happen. I don't think I'd ever use them as a replacement for L1 or L2, and I'd say that left bump and right bump L1s and R1s are perhaps not laid out. There's a lot of physical things that I could see you could tweak on the Steam Deck to make it a better controller, per se. The screen on the middle and the hardware inside, I think, are pretty great. But the button layout, the buttons, the button sizes, the triggers, all of that feels like that could be improved. I didn't look at this video, I didn't look at this. And this was the article that was down from last stream. Well, the Warcraft player count rises again ahead of a War Within expansion. So, yeah, that's all I have. Not really a ton of new news today, which is fine. So then we can go through all the games that came out on Steam in the last stream and just try and figure out how many of these do I want to make a YouTube short on. And these are the shoot 'em up games that might have some historical relevancy, but I'm not going to bother to put them on the follow list because it's just not my style of game. I question how big the audience really is for shoot 'em up games, particularly old shoot 'em up games. In my mind, they all mix together, and there was maybe one or two shoot 'em ups that I played in some kind of arcade machine once or twice. A stacking game. This feels a little too asset flippy. Let's see. Merc Mayhem. No, the screenshots don't make this look good. It feels more like it's a mobile game port. Lost Love Island. It feels like this is a JRPG that's worse than your standard JRPG game. That's definitely trying to sell on nudity, in that there's just a whole bunch of menus covering up the screen. Enigmarvel. You give that a chance. One of the things I definitely am going to work on my Steam Deck is figuring out how to use just a Chrome browser, I suspect, Chromium, to go through my follow list. And it is definitely going to be a case that if I don't want to play a game and I have nothing better to do, I'm going to be doing follow list cleanups off screen and on my Steam Deck. This is a asset flip climbing jumping game with just animals, which gives it a different art style, certainly, but it's still going to be a no. Gold scraping simulator. Yeah. Terror Tech Worlds, I'll give that a chance. But yeah, I've completely dropped the ball on follow list cleanup. That would inherently mean I need the macros installed, at least some of them, but that's not a big deal. I was almost certainly going to end up doing that. This looks gory as far as a game goes, and might be something to it there because of that. It is a dangerous gamble, but one that I think would pay off for me to have a real commitment to being gory. But it is very much just like a horror movie or a horror game in that you are going for that niche audience and you have to satisfy that niche audience that have a higher level of tolerance for goriness and horror. You cannot make a gory or horrific video game and then get the majority of gamers. Gamers are a little bit more tolerant than moviegoers, I think, as far as scary and spooky things, but they definitely aren't super tolerant to playing a lot of horror games, and they're usually not looking for a horror game where you're not actually in control and you can't shoot back and it actually would just be scary. This visual novel, Western style, is kind of a great example of how much horror has changed over the this is that Exit 8 game, a clone of Exit 8, but this time they're on a train, subway. So that's gonna be a no, just because it's a clone. Yeah. But yeah, old horror stories were designed to be just scary, 100%. Whereas video games are very much interacting with it and fighting back against the scary thing. And even movies have long since evolved from being just scary to having a protagonist fight back. And usually at least one of the protagonists succeeds at surviving the horror, which is definitely not in line with what old horror Edgar Allan Poe stories would be about. So yeah. There is. Oh, another thing I should probably mention is that to have the Decky plugin installed on the Steam Deck, your Steam Deck basically seems to be, at least, it has to be in the stable channel of Steam, which means then you can't have the family sharing. And if you don't have the family sharing enabled, you can't run two separate games at the same time. And this is probably something most people already knew, but I just hadn't really experienced any of it. So I had Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel open, just sitting there open on my computer. I went to launch a different game and it said we're going to disconnect the other computer. Like, so yeah, that is almost certainly something that Steam Families is trying to deal with, and it's something Steam Families has to really come out of beta pretty quickly to fix that problem, because it is not realistic by any means for somebody with the same account on the same LAN network, same Wi-Fi network, that they can't launch 2 games on their own account at the same time, even if they are 2 separate games. That is ridiculous, particularly in the concept of having a Steam Deck, because then inherently what they're making an argument with their default rules as they are now is that only one person's attention is allowed at one time. You can't even multitask. Multitasking wouldn't be allowed, let alone the idea of one person having a brother or sister or spouse, significant other playing one game while the other person playing the other game. Yeah. And that's something that certainly should have been the default from the beginning. And I imagine publishers fought against that concept for a long time. It is certainly a step backwards. The idea that only one person could play Super Mario Brothers, and then Nintendo would have demanded a different person in the same house, a brother or sister, and buy another copy of Super Mario Brothers and make a different account to play it, is kind of ridiculous. A lot of these little problems, I wonder if they aren't in part why we have yet to see Valve really try and over promote in the, I'm gonna say no to this boxing game. It looks too visually generic in the background, so it looks cheap. But yeah, certainly I think Valve would have enough money that they could have made more sales and promoted the Steam Deck even more. I'm not sure if they have enough Steam Decks. Notably, it's not like they're really trying to get a Steam Deck in every GameStop or every Walmart. We have another live-action dating sim game that's not getting received well. What languages is this? Chinese? I think increasingly we may see more of this where it's just Chinese gravure models trying to sell themselves in this Chinese. It's not porn because porn is illegal, but it's as close as we can get. In a lot of ways, that'll be part of something that we almost certainly will start talking about, is just a growing problem in China of incels, involuntary celibate people, which is way more of a realistic problem in China when you have, I think it is 6 men to every female in the country. And it's not like they are 6 well-adjusted men by any means. There almost certainly is something that happens to you if you grow up in that kind of situation. If there are 6 boys in every kindergarten class to every 1 female, pretty obviously that sets you off on a bad path of not being able to really deal with or relate to females, which is only going to snowball and become worse and worse with every future year. This looks like an interesting art style. Yep. Despite all my little problems with the software, which are kind of easily fixed, the bigger problems on the Steam Deck would be just scaling it up, getting it cheaper, and getting it in the hands of more people. This one's already mixed, so I'm gonna say no to it. But yeah, they definitely were thinking on the lines of it being a competitor to Nintendo Switch, but the amount of hardware that people want and kind of need to play games puts it much closer to the idea, and it needs to be sold more, as this is what a Nintendo Switch 2 plus a PC, and then at that point the argument kind of makes sense. More than likely, whatever the Nintendo Switch 2 is actually called will be a $250 to $300 console, and a Xbox Series X, which is really the only one reasonable to buy, is a $500 console. Neither one of those devices can run a Linux desktop operating system, and notably PlayStation 3 could launch into a Linux operating system, and it got absolutely no traction there, and then they eventually removed that capability. There was a few people, and the US government was using it, but the cell processor on the PlayStation 3 made it very difficult for it to make sense. Plus, not having the portability element made it less useful of a concept. Furry backrooms, so you've got two memes now being merged together. So yeah, when you make the argument that Nintendo Switch 2 is probably $300, when you make the argument that an Xbox Series X is really the only console you should buy and it's $500, a $600 Steam Deck OLED 512GB model is, while a massive amount of money to spend on one device, is effectively giving you a device that is much better than a Chromebook and much more capable of installing different apps than a Chromebook, and a portable Switch 2 competitor. The only thing that undercuts it a little bit is that the only way you end up not buying a Nintendo Switch 2 to play Nintendo games is to literally try and pirate the newest of Nintendo games. That's about the only way. I'm done with these Survivor top-down hack and slash clones at this point, regardless of how good they might be. It's a market that's just really oversaturated. And here's another one of these. Let's get some 3D models and put them in bikinis and sell on lewd imagery type garbage games. I think I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, I don't know how you justify the price. If you can't afford it, you just can't afford it, and there's just a high number of people that just can't afford it at nearly $600. And there's almost certainly a lot of cases of products that would be better, but the high entry just acts as a consistent barrier to get to that point. And thus, when parents need to buy a console for a Christmas gift, they probably would just buy the next Nintendo Switch and say, well, that's the least amount of money that's the most amount of money I can spend on this Christmas gift, not knowing that they are effectively locking themselves into significantly higher game sales prices later on to make up the difference. And that's the problem, I guess, with the buy now pay later, I guess might be the way to describe that concept that a lot of products offers. You zero down on a car, you're going to be paying high car payments every month for the next 30 years. Or very little down on a mortgage, you're going to be paying high payments on the mortgage payment for the next 30 years. Yeah. And certainly you can try and blame people, and I imagine people do deserve a little bit of blame about being poor at saving, but it's pretty impossible to save money when you're barely making ends meet and paying bills that are absolutely having to be paid. Like, very rarely can you skip out on paying for food and clothing. And there are just constant disasters that happen, I think, more often than not. The bigger your family is, the more you're likely to have unexpected expenses that should be expected, but they never are. And I have no idea how you'd fix that with the Steam Deck. Like, the only thing I guess Steam could do is they could straight up charge your credit card over the course of several months, which then would have to have them shut down remotely Steam Decks that when the credit cards don't get paid. So inherently, I guess that's the only thing you could really do if you want to buy a Steam Deck and can't afford it for a Christmas gift, is buy it on a credit card and then pay ridiculous credit card fees. I don't know how Valve can otherwise reduce the price other than just finding cheaper components, which hard to do. Certainly seems like it'd be very hard to do. Being able to sell the Steam Deck with like a minimal amount of internal memory and then encouraging people to replace the memory and making it easier to replace the memory internally could save maybe $80, and then maybe you just put the controllers as being detachable and you make a light version that is just the screen and monitor. Or maybe you sell a version that doesn't even have a screen and monitor on it, and then the screen and monitor is detachable, but none of that really makes sense physically in the creation of the Steam Deck. They'd have to rethink things quite a bit. Maybe a smaller battery, and then you could put a second battery in it. I don't think batteries are that expensive, but you know, upgradable, replaceable batteries would be an interesting move. But yeah, you're probably saving only $40 if you put half the battery life on it. Plus, that would just make the Steam Deck feel really poor as far as a product. They basically would have to create some kind of system for Valve where you're paying like for some kind of system that gives you payments on a monthly plan that would let you build up money. I guess maybe that could work if it was a case where you pay a monthly fee to Valve, let's say of $30, then you get let's say, $40 worth of credits to buy whatever you want on Steam, then you could have a pay early and get some extra store credit because of that. Situation where in 10 months you could buy this plan on one Christmas, and by the next Christmas you would potentially have $400 if you saved up that could go to a Steam Deck. You'd still be $200 short, but then that is very reasonable at that point. Otherwise, you're in this plan and every now and then you're buying, like every 2 months you're buying a $60 game, or every month you're buying a $30 $40 game. Of course, if it wasn't a 1-for-1 ratio, then Valve would be losing money. They would have to effectively waive their 30% cut. Well, no, on the accounting of that might work as a concept. This is a complicated concept, but I think the accounting might actually work there. If Valve waived a percentage of their 30% cut on every sale of a game, and instead made up that difference or more by assuming that they were going to make an interest on the money you're paying up front as a monthly fee, the interest is probably to be expected to be like 5% annually. So let's guess that that's roughly going to be like 1%, just to make it easy. 1%'s not a particularly good offering. You probably would want to say 10%, extra 10% off as a minimal. So the accounting doesn't quite work that way, but it might be an interesting way to go. You pay some amount of money, let's say $30 a month. You get an extra 10% off of for that money, so $33 worth of store credit, and Valve is just hoping that in that store credit you leave it in their hands so they can make interest off of it, and that there will just be a lot of people that forget and a lot of people that don't buy anything. You get $33 per month of store credit for $30 a month, and you have a payment plan effectively then to buy a Steam Deck, which in 10 months you could get the cheapest Steam Deck. In 20 months, roughly, you could get the OLED 512 gigabyte version. More realistically, you would probably take 2 or 3 years to do it. So that's probably a little too long, so it'd probably be closer to a $60 a month, giving you $66 of store credit. Then in 10 months, you've got enough money for a Steam Deck. And does that really work financially? I am just speculating here. It's not like anybody at Valve is actually listening to me, but I think it does. Because if they're giving you 10%, then they just have to take, say, 10% less off of their cut. So they still would be getting 20% cut for every game that you bought with the money you would be getting. That's where the financials are a little iffy, whether they really need a 30% cut or not. But that would be also a way in which Valve could maintain their 30% cut and pay out the publishers and the developers 30% while still making a different offering, and at least making the argument, well, in these scenarios, these rare scenarios, we're actually only taking 20%, so we're waiving 10%. Of course, the publishers would probably have a field day if you advertised it as an extra 10% off games that they didn't authorize. So you wouldn't do it that way. You would say pay us $60 a month and you'll get $66 of Steam credit, a significant amount of which they would hope you would spend on Team Fortress 2 skins and Counter-Strike 2 skins and things like that. Wasteful digital products of less value, and that Valve is getting all the profit on, really. It would also bring you further away from the point shop, which I feel like the point shops really sucks, but it's definitely what they're pointing people to. I guess the other thing is you could spend $60 a month and get points on a plan, but yeah, there's no way you're going to be satisfied spending $60 worth of points, even if you could buy a Steam Deck with points, which would be nice. You'd almost certainly have to have 100,000 points or more to buy a Steam Deck, though, if it was even an option. Anyways, here's the Steam DB charts. We basically already scrolled down here, and then we'll do the headlines, and then we'll wrap up for today. It's not anything particularly jumping out as being new. Weirdly, I feel like this is smaller than it should be. Yep. Yeah, this feels much better to show than what it was. That still shows the top 10 on this one page. Then let's see what my chart is saying, if it's accurate in any way. Helldivers has fallen down again, up and down with a downward trend overall. And generally it looks like we're just seeing a downward trend overall. Dragon's 2 Dogma has fallen sharply. So it doesn't seem like any of the newer games that came out in the past couple of weeks have maintained enough of an audience in that initial launch. And I'm not sure we've ever really seen too many examples of games that are older coming back from the grave and having new people play it, which really is a condemnation on the idea of season passes, DLC, and just updates in general. It just does not get you to those top numbers that every game company would prefer to have. At best, it's just supporting and maintaining your existing numbers. Let's see. This is interesting. The Slayers anime series is a very old series, but maybe they've made a refresh of it, and they're doing an anime cross promotion with Summoner's War Chronicles. We haven't really seen as many of those as you would think, considering how many of the anime to mobile game crossovers that have happened. And I guess this is perhaps just an example of a free-to-play game having a PC game, and that's going to increasingly happen. And here you have a fairly new, overwhelmingly positive game at 20% off discount. I question if Valve does not directly control the discounts on some of these sales that are special offers or Just almost flash sales. And I say they're not promoting the Steam Deck, but they definitely have the Valve Index and Steam Deck as the number 3 shelf on the front page. So they are doing something there. And yeah, nobody really cared or talked about the EA games. See, the layout of these triggers, I question if they are correct or not. I'm gonna have to play a lot more to figure it out, though. The South Park game, I think, is new, but I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a lot of enthusiasm for it. But yeah, nothing really going on sale. So let's go through the headlines here real quick. Sony has revealed April's PlayStation Plus Essential games. Bandai Namco releases 3 free Steam games developed by new recruits. Interesting. Let's find these games. I feel like I've seen these games. If I open this, and then swing here. So we don't need to really put it on the follow list, we can just add it to the library. Increasingly with the Steam Deck, I think I might be more willing to just grab free games also, where I've been mostly trying to avoid free games because it's kind of silly to play a game if it is already available for purchase, but you never know if they are going to stop being free. And honestly, that should be less of a concern in favor of just finding good games worth playing. The idea that this is new recruits, though, feels like Bandai Namco is doing something fairly weird here. Instead of having new employees or new recruits work on existing games, and instead they're using the fact that they're new recruits as a shield that the game may not be that big or that interesting, while still having Bandai Namco put out some experimental games to feel if there might be an argument to expand on those ideas, which arguably I would say Bandai Namco is pretty bad as far as, let's just look at them, just putting out new types of games on Steam as the publisher, as the developer. Really just Tekken 8 and Ace Combat. I think they might have more things that they published, though. This Phoenix publisher I don't recognize. It might be the PC publisher. I wouldn't say that these look like Bandai Namco developed games, though, either. This might also be a case of Bandai Namco experimenting on PC game publishing and releasing, and development in particular. It is very weird for a Japanese company to let new recruits, whatever that means, get any credit at all, and I really wouldn't expect Bandai Namco to do that. It's a new employee training project which runs in collaboration with the Japanese publisher Phoenix. Interesting. So I wouldn't be surprised if Phoenix is mostly running the show there. Moving on. Former Dragon Age creative director's new game receives a teaser trailer ahead of a full reveal. This is Mike Laidlaw's Yellowbrick Games will self-publish the fantasy action-adventure game in 2025. We're getting the beginnings of promises for games in 2025, which I think in part is just highlighting that they are not expecting to really release that many games in 2024 and the rest of this year. Marvel Rivals revealed as a 6 vs 6 team shooter from Call of Duty and Battlefield developers. Judge rules for Sony in a $500 million controller lawsuit. Rise of the Ronin director wants his next game to achieve things we weren't able to do this time. Which, that's ambitious, but perhaps not the best way to say that publicly. Smilegate Barcelona reportedly closed and all employees have been let go. UK Games charity Special Effect to receive the prestigious BAFTA Special Award. GBA Racer F-Zero Maximum Velocity is coming to Switch Online this week. Phil Spencer wants other digital storefronts like Epic Game Store or itch.io on Xbox. Xbox Cloud Gaming is adding mouse and keyboard support. I imagine this is what you can do on the Steam Deck, is that you can do the cloud gaming concept, and with cloud gaming adding mouse and keyboard support, it makes a lot of sense that an Xbox Cloud Gaming app or collaboration could happen more. It's a tough sell, certainly, to buy a Steam Deck and also be paying for the cloud gaming level, but on a certain level, that is the exact same pay early for a membership concept and then get streaming rights or get rights to play certain games. Valve would do it probably by just giving you actual money, whereas Microsoft just gives you hand-picked games that you can stream and play, but they tend to be slightly newer, more AAA games. But also those games might not run particularly well on cloud gaming or particularly well on a Steam Deck resolution, which is a problem basically for any AAA game, is that it may not run well on a Steam Deck resolution. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. Xbox claims mass layoffs were the outcome of a concerning lack of industry growth. Xbox boss Phil Spencer says multi-platform brand pivot partially driven by Gen Z habits. Younger players want to be able to access content wherever they want. Yeah, and that is not an extreme stance to take, in my opinion. PS5's game help feature is expanding with user-generated videos. That sounds like that is a dangerous idea, certainly, but maybe it's user-generated videos of what's happening in the game, but even then it seems like it would be very easily to manipulate game clips to be inappropriate or just wrong with the help feature. But if anything, this probably highlights that their game help feature was too expensive to maintain and have professional people actually run it, and now they are giving up on it somewhat and making it just user-generated content. Moving on. BioShock's Ken Levine reveals more details on his, quote, narrative Lego game, Judas. Again, I kind of don't have any care to listen to Ken Levine bloviate. Marvel Games is teasing an exciting reveal for Wednesday. I assume that was the Marvel Rivals reveal. The Arctic Camo Special Edition Xbox controller is now available worldwide. A Sonic Heroes remake is reportedly in development for the Switch 2. Timesplitter's boss says the cancellation was a big letdown and he's likely done with the series. Which I definitely saw a different headline than this one. I imagine Timesplitters is just likely done, period. The concept, I said this several times, just does not work that you'd go to different time frames and play a first-person shooter, which would mean you'd have to animate multiple time frames, which is just too development intensive. Moving on. A new trailer for Sea Smash VRS shows the game running on a Meta Quest. I have no idea what Sea Smash VRS is. Dev says Like a Dragon series must keep using its own engine. Let's see, the series technical director explains why triangular education is important to make the Dragon engine better. Let's see. The Like a Dragon series absolutely must is the translation from Japanese. Continue using its bespoke Dragon engine, but the staff must also learn about alternate options, the series technical director says. I imagine this technical director is a very demanding type Japanese manager, and he's basically saying, yeah, staff have to learn, perhaps on their own time when they're not being paid, about alternate options, but also I'm not willing to make any changes whatsoever that would possibly be risky, so we're going to stick with what we already have. And at a certain level, when those are the responses to those questions, is this really even news? To say that somebody somewhere is going to continue doing what they've already done. Perhaps this is an echo, as far as an interview, from what the players of the Like a Dragon series would like to see, which I could imagine they might want to see them move away from a proprietary engine into something closer to the, say, Unreal Engine, which I don't know if that would really improve the Like a Dragon series by much. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Moving on. Remedy has shared new details about Condor, its live service control spin-off. The game will enter full production this year and won't be free to play. So it sounds to me like Condor is going to be set in the Control universe, but it is just going to be some kind of co-op multiplayer. I wouldn't be surprised if it's player versus player game. And inherently, if they're making a co-op game, it's probably not going to be very story focused around Control anyways, so I question if it's going to have the elements that people liked about Control in it, or if it isn't just going to be a game where there's some generic SCP running around and you have 2 or more players all running around trying to fight the generic SCP over and over again. Moving on. Some publishers reportedly questioning support for the Xbox amid flatlining sales. Yep. Definitely doesn't feel like now is the time to jump into the Xbox infrastructure at all. Which inherently means also, if you have, say, an Xbox 360 and you have a bunch of old Xbox 360 discs, you might slowly lose access as your Xbox breaks, particularly if they stopped making Xboxes or they dropped backwards compatibility, or if you bought diskless versions that wouldn't let you play the old games. The good news is that won't happen for a while. There's a ton of Xbox 360s around if you're still just playing on them, but eventually, without that forward compatibility, or backward compatibility, or with Xboxes just leaving the industry and the market completely, which could eventually happen. There might be a lack of value there. It would be the equivalent of having a bunch of old NES games, which, yes, you could have a bunch of old NES games, but increasingly you're not going to have a working Nintendo Entertainment System, and you would have to buy increasingly expensive hardware emulators, like the Analog, I think is one of them, to plug in the cartridges. And at a certain point, if you're plugging in the cartridges into a new device, you should probably just copy those ROMs. And if you're copying the ROMs from your own physical copies, at a certain point it might just be easier to download the ROMs from the internet and pirate the ROMs effectively. And at a certain point, if that's the easiest way to play old Xbox 360 games, then why stop at the ones you actually purchased back in the day? Why not just have all the Xbox 360 games? I question if we are at a point that even Xbox 360 games can be emulated, particularly on the Steam Deck. I'd have to look into that. Almost certainly original Xbox games can be, but 360 games might be a little bit hardware demanding. But then, if there was one console that would be easier to emulate, I would suspect it probably is going to be the Xbox Series. Anyways, moving on. Cyberpunk 2077 is getting a free trial on the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S. Phil Spencer has discussed what he'd like to see in a potential Xbox handheld. Bethesda offers small Elder Scrolls 6 updates as series celebrate the 30th anniversary. I think at this point I've probably already covered all these news stories. So it's questionable whether I should bother to continue reading the headlines or not. I still don't really know what the value of making chapters and clips are, but I definitely think there is a value. Also, my channel is somewhat doing well and succeeding lately, which is a great improvement to see. It's nice to see. That being said, it would have to just be a massive snowball effect to increase my watch time and actually have enough subscribers to even get monetized, and then I would have to be shocked by the amount of money that would come in from monetization, and I'd have to be fairly safe and secure that that money would always come in, which is unlikely that you'd ever get that kind of guarantee. So let's just go through all the headlines, which has nothing to do with what I was just saying, really. I was just rambling as I was thinking. A Nocturnal Vapor Xbox Series X and S control is seemingly leaked. So this is not the Arctic Camouflage one that just came out. So they effectively leaked a new controller after, and then a couple days later they put out, they released, which was probably already scheduled to be released, the Arctic Camouflage set of controllers and Xbox Series X skin, or Xbox Series X console that it has been skinned. Moving on. PlayStation confirms Stellar Blade demo released this week. Larian CEO denies that moving on from Baldur's Gate was due to a Wizards of the Coast conflict. Or conflict with Wizards of the Coast. Capcom lists Dragon's Dogma 2 update plans, including new game and 30 frames per second cap. A trailer for Sonic Toys Party, a mobile game similar to Fall Guys, has seemingly leaked. EA Sports Club FC fights off Dragon's Dogma and Princess Peach in this week's UK physical charts. Yep. I've seen a few people talking about Princess Peach, and I saw it actually on sale for like $50, which honestly I think the game hurts itself even being at $50. I'd like to see it succeed, but I would almost assume that it would have had to have been a $30 game to start with, just to convince people to play a game starring Princess Peach instead of Mario, or starring a female instead of a male character. Anyways, moving on. Devs closing live service games should make a private hosted version, says the Knockout City developer. Days Gone developer Ben Studio is working on a AAA live service game. Final Fantasy XIV director jokes he moved the expansion launch to give players 1 week to finish Elden Ring's DLC. Zelda movie director says he wants it to be serious and cool, but also fun and whimsical. The director says Final Fantasy IX references in Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail are a secret amid remake reports. PlayStation has released a Jim Ryan digital bobblehead to celebrate his career. Spyro and Crash Studio Toys for Bob has reportedly agreed to partner with Microsoft on its next game. We haven't really seen a follow-up on this story as far as I can tell, so this is reported but unconfirmed, which so many of these article headlines that I cover probably are reported and then never confirmed. If I were to strictly censor and filter out all the rumors, there'd be many days in which there's basically no news to talk about, or at least a significantly smaller amount of news to talk about. Moving on. Resident Evil 9 could be an open world game, it's been claimed. Weeks before its closure, every Mario Maker level has finally been beaten. Overwatch 2's future PvE content has reportedly been permanently cancelled. GTA 6 release date could slip to 2026, it's been claimed. Final Fantasy XVI, the Rising Tide expansion has been dated. Book of Demons is currently free to claim on Good Old Games. Okay, and that's going to bring us to the Gamatsu articles, and now it's just a question about how much of this we're going to have to go through. PlayStation Plus monthly games lineup for April 2024 announced. Hakokoro 5 has been announced for the Switch. What kind of game is this? Let's see. Kokoro, I think, is heart. So I'm expecting this to be some kind of... It's a puzzle game. Let's see if we can figure out what kind of puzzle game it is. Okay, it's a box flipping puzzle game in which balls fall into the boxes and that causes certain damage effects. So it's kind of a twist on like a Bomberman game. Interesting. Well, there's apparently been 4 of these, and I suspect none of them have come out of Japan. Anyways, moving on. A team-based PvP third-person shooter, Marvel Rivals, has been announced for PC. Let's see. So we'll make sure we make a YouTube short on that. Metal Hellsinger VR announced for the PSVR 2, Steam VR, Quest 2, and 3. Inherently, at this point, it does make sense to make YouTube shorts around VR games that get press releases in particular. There's just going to be so few of them anyways, it doesn't matter. Hellgate Redemption announced for consoles and PC. New game in the Hellgate London franchise by the original creator. This has been built in the Unreal Engine 5. I can't help but suspect that this will probably fly like a lead balloon. I don't think even the original Hellgate London was particularly popular as much as it was just talked about by a bunch of people. A lot of mainstream video game journalists talking about it quite a bit. And so this is from that Lunacy Game Studio that was just founded, so this is the total follow-up on that, I suppose. Yellow Brick Games to self-publish a fantasy action adventure revealed set for April 2nd. Parish for the PS4 and 5 and Xbox One and Series launches April 15th. It's already available on PC. One thing I would like to see, and I don't have any real way of improving this, is that more things would be downloaded and preloaded on Firefox than what are. Of course, that would also probably just take up a ton of space. But I'd like to be able to click on links and have them immediately open, particularly if they're going to Steam from Gematsu. That's a direct, obvious place that it should just always download these links. And I guess I could probably do that manually by scanning every page and then having a Steam link open automatically. Yeah, I guess that works. If I find any extra time to program it, I could search for the word Steam, because it's always the word Steam, and open the tab. And then inherently, the way that would open the tab is that I would see this article and then click to close. Use my middle click mouse button plugin to close the page, and then it would immediately go to the Steam page. Of course, then that would put the Steam page on the right, which would be kind of a problem. So I'd have to probably do something slightly different. I'd probably have to go through all of the tabs a second time. Just very quickly see if that worked. That could happen still. That could work. Well, that's certainly a thought. There probably are millions of ways I could program and optimize my time, and it only gets me so far. Though it doesn't turn garbage into gold or anything like that. It just saves me some time to do something else. That's basically all efficiency ever is that it doesn't reduce the 40 hours of a work week. It just creates more getting accomplished in 40 hours, which often leads to more time being needed. Anyways, moving on. No Man's Sky Orbital update is now available. Now, is No Man's Sky actually on Steam? Or is it not? It is. And it's on my wish list. Well, I definitely would play No Man's Sky well before I'd play Starfield. I'm not sure I really want to play either games, however. Double Dragon Gaiden, Rise of the Dragons free DLC Sacred Reunion details new characters and modes. Famitsu review scores for issue 1843. They give Dungeon Drafters a 29 out of 40, pretty low. Lazriel Demon's Fall, 31 out of 40. Reveal, 30 out of 40. And Snufflekin Melody of Moominkin Valley, or Moomin Valley, a 32 out of 40. Some fairly low names, low recognizable names. I don't recognize any of them really, other than Snufflekin, and even at that, it's barely getting a 32 out of 40. just leave it at that, I guess. Shinjuku Soumei has been delayed to May 24th, and the demo launches in late April. This is, I assume, a visual novel of some sort. Yeah. And if it's been delayed, I'm not going to make a YouTube short just because it's been delayed. Moving on. Star Ocean The Second Story R version 1.1 update launches March 27th, adds highest difficulty mode, new raid enemies, and more. Duet Night Abyss PC technical test trailer is available. The technical test beginning March 27th. Is this on Steam? It's kind of funny how you have like a white and red color palette that seems fairly prevalent in Japanese animation, and then I've seen some growing brownish hues color palette, and then you very much always had the very consistent bright reds and greens and blues color palettes, of which I could probably divide those into several other color palettes, but there definitely are some unique color palettes that lead to a unique feel and a unique art style for these different animated styles in games. Whereas you look at the Western games and almost all of them are just natural skin tone browns and hyper realistic color palettes that often mean there's too many colors being used, and so there isn't a standout highlight color like red that shows up in several places, even though this is more pinkish, and or a standout secondary color like shades of white or grayish white. But yeah, I think limiting your palette in art very often can make things feel more intentional and less natural, which can be a good thing if you're actually trying to highlight your artistic skill, whereas hyper-realistic natural just looks like something like the Unreal Engine automatically generated a bunch of trees, and there was no actual artistic skill put into making an open world forest that you're wandering around for no reason. Anyways, moving on. Game Boy Advance game for the Nintendo Switch Online, adding F-Zero Maximum Velocity on March 29th. Skullgirl's second Encore DLC character Marie is now available. I'm not sure where the fandom, if there is still a fandom of Skullgirls, is at this point. There was definitely, the last thing I recall being mentioned as far as Skullgirls was the late to the party censorship that just came out of nowhere as far as Skullgirls, and just changing like upskirt shots and things on these cartoony characters, and just seemed like it was unnecessary changes to waste your time on, since nobody was complaining about it, and you were obviously going to get somebody complaining about changing the game or censoring the game. It would be better, frankly, to just put something on Twitter and apologize for the way the game is, and say we're not going to bother to change it, but say it wouldn't be the style we would do if we made the game today. That's I guess a little bit of a middle ground there, if there needs to be a middle ground. Meanwhile, the Skullgirls community, I don't know how big it is or how enthusiastic they are, which probably means they're not that big and not that enthusiastic. I'm not sure if Skullgirls game has been in Evo for a while, if it ever has been in Evo. Anyways, moving on. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door for Switch has our Story Begins trailer. I need to stop saying anyways, moving on. I'm repeating myself too much. Should just go quiet and close the tab and read the next headline. Neptunia Game Maker R Evolution launches May 14th in the West. You can see quite a bit of extra stuff in the limited edition, which this is perhaps one of the few games where it might be somewhat justifiable to have a limited edition, since it is already a niche game with a appearance of there being a lot of fandom who might enjoy collector's boxes and soundtracks and cloth posters. But I question if even these kinds of limited editions really should be made. I suspect they shouldn't. Is there anything else we can take from this? The Neptunia games are probably great examples of games that I should play on my Steam Deck, and if I can ever figure out a way to play games on the Steam Deck and make footage and make it make sense to make footage that way, because the Neptunia series is JRPG games and there's potentially going to be a lot of grinding and repetitiveness there. But also I don't want to create a situation where I'm playing a Neptunia game when I otherwise could be making content on my main computer. So it's definitely going to be a trade-off there. DC Universe Online for PlayStation 5 is now available. It Takes Two sales have topped 16 million. 6 million copies sold in just over a year, so it's taken quite a few more years to get that extra 10. It Takes Two launched in 2021, so 3 years later. That's not terrible. I'm surprised they get the numbers even that big, considering how you have to play in co-op for this game, and it does have this unique divorce narrative happening, which makes it feel inappropriate, at least at the beginning, for a kid to be one of the co-op players. And it's kind of inappropriate for two married people or dating people to be co-op players. So it never felt like a game that had quite as big of an audience as it could have, because of it being co-op and because of the narrative. That being said, clearly a lot of people did buy and play the game, so I'm almost certainly wrong. Just felt that way to me, and I just don't have a co-op player. There is, I guess, a thought maybe I could play co-op with myself on a Steam Deck, but I think that would be kind of crazy. It just wouldn't really work in the same way that I could probably play myself in a co-op game with two controllers. That's just not realistic. Let's see. Wild Frost is coming to iOS and Android on April 11th. First Dwarf gameplay overview trailer is available on Gamatsu. First-person horror adventure game Dollhouse Behind the Broken Mirror has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Do we have a Steam link? No, we do not. Post-apocalyptic point-and-click adventure game Raunoit for PC launches April 17th. It's probably French. I don't know how you pronounce that. Raunoit? Noir? Raunoit? Probably. Something like that. I feel like horror games and point-and-click games work very well together, because it's not a run-and-gun shooter gameplay mechanic, which makes horror games not really work. But at some level, there probably needs to be some kind of horror game where you barely even control the character, and that would be weird. You'd have to figure out something there. And this isn't even a horror game. This is a post-apocalyptic game. I misread it. Which, yeah. Post-apocalyptic games, always intriguing, often unsatisfying. I'll leave it at that. PS5 system update adds community game help in 2024. Game help will be available for non-PlayStation Plus subscribers. Interesting. So they're shifting it from PlayStation Plus subscribers to non-subscribers, which seems very realistic, but then they also are going extremely cheap here and basically abandoning the community game help concept by allowing anybody to upload clips to help people, and we'll see how that goes. V Rising Legacy of Castlevania collaboration announced, due out on May 8th. So this is a more Diablo looking game than a Castlevania looking game, in my opinion. That's in early access and yet is somehow going to have a collab before actually leaving early access, and has been in early access since 2022. It definitely doesn't inspire confidence, but you look at the reviews and you can't deny that they're high. This may just be one of those games that's more of a live service type game that is always going to claim to be in early access. Asphalt Legends Unite announced for all consoles, PC, iOS, and Android. No Steam link here in this case. Yeah, increasingly I'm trying right now to just go quiet instead of saying some filler phrase. See how that works, or see if that just makes awkward silences. Not that I'll ever watch this footage back to actually see. Guilty Gear Strive Final Season 3 DLC character teased. A Season 4 has also been announced. Deck Builder Dungeon Defense game Vanbrand's Dungeon Monarch announced for PC. Something somewhat odd on the proportions of just in the angle here of this shot, and you have rather thick side leg here, and then a rather thin looking leg from the front on perspective, and then somewhat thinner arm here and thicker arm here, and then a fairly thick neck, and then a lot of cleavage and boob here, as if it is falling out of this metal armor, where it's mostly a tucked in covered boob here. And this is your main protagonist character that you're depicting. The other guy is covered by the logo. This guy back here, this guy's way back here. Here's a wolf that is pretty well depicted. You have a sorcerer in shadow as far as the bad guys, and then you have a succubus character that is too far away, and then you have a Dark Knight style character that's too far away. See if we can see any of the other screenshots. Inherently, what the actual game looks like is nothing close to the thumbnail, and we see a lot of that on Steam, certainly. But I'll give it a chance. Survival horror adventure game The Coma 2B Catacomb announced for PC. What makes me wonder about that is just how many games are in the Coma series at this point. Here you have just a keyboard adventure game, not even pointing and clicking really. Yeah, it's more of an indication that horror games should be very limited in how much you can input. Otherwise, you need to make a game where you can do a lot of things, but everything is just horrible. Like, if you shoot somebody, it's just even more gross and horrific and worse, and so you just don't want to shoot people if you have a gun. That it is just easier to run away. In a lot of ways, The Last of Us was supposed to be something of that experience, where you were supposed to just distract the enemies in Last of Us 1, but yeah, that concept didn't really get highlighted as much as it probably should have been. Sci-fi mystery visual novel Murder on Spaceship Altair has been announced for the PS4 and 5, Switch, PC, iOS, and Android. Here you have a character that looks somewhat like Hatsune Miku. Slightly different art style, it looks like, overall, in character designs. Yeah, looks decent enough. Sky Children of Light for PC launches in early access on April 10th. Weird, I could have sworn this game had been on Steam a long time ago. Nope, it just was announced. The problem with Sky Children of Light, though, is that this is a game I tried to play and it has just a forced multiplayer element to it, and so your experience is going to be drastically affected by who is randomly on the game griefing you. And I looked at it very much as a puzzle game, and I think the developers look at it much more as a MMORPG game. There are newer puzzle games that have come out that are MMORPGs, Islands of Insight in particular, and there is definitely a question there also as far as just, can you have a forced MMO game with puzzle elements that won't just lead to people griefing you and solving the puzzles before you even have time to look at them, which is a real big problem, particularly for content creators like me, where we're going to talk about things and spend a lot more time than we probably should. I'm still watching Cracking the Cryptic way more often and trying all the puzzles, trying to train myself to be better at doing Sudoku puzzles, some of which I am in the top 200, 250 of solving these puzzles, so I am definitely entering a very small community of people. But I'm also still taking 3 or 4 times as much time as the professionals on the Cracking the Cryptic YouTube channel. So it is easily 60, 70, 100 minutes to do it, and I definitely don't really have the free time to be doing that for the more complicated variants of Sudoku that they do. The Crew Motorfest is coming to Steam on April 18th. And that should be our last thing. I feel like I just already have made a YouTube short on this, so I'm not going to make another YouTube short on it. So that's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com, and again, I think GameDeveloper.com is either broken or they just don't have any news stories to talk about. Let's look. The one news story we did talk about was Sega of America union workers securing raises and layoff protections. And then Smilegate Barcelona shutting down. And then Sony. So there are news stories that actually did happen. We've talked about them all already, however. Here's one from, we asked indies at Day of Devs how to survive the game industry hellscape. That's a inflammatory headline to catch some eyes. Advocacy micro talks at GDC directly confront enabling harassment campaigns. Which that's probably not an article I really would want to read, knowing GameDeveloper.com's bias. Now, there's several stories here that should have had tabs open, but the only one that did open was Sega of America union workers secure raises and layoff protections with the first collectively bargained contract. Okay, and this shouldn't say Steam fall list cleanup. It should say end of show, so I have those two tabs backwards for some reason. Yep, and that's going to be the end of the show. So as always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.